Hello, everyone. I'm here to introduce Rahul. Of course, he has an awesome resume, Stanford, MIT, early on the team at Palantir, which is famous for forward deployed engineering. Most importantly, he's had thousands of hours working on implementations just like yours, working with customers in the field. And he's here to enlighten us about that today. Rahul is really a bridge person at the intersection of clinical ops and engineering, and he's often translating some of the most complex requirements of problems and workflows into applications that people use. I asked him to prepare a talk on what knowledge devs should have to be maximally effective at their craft. And I thought he would say SDK something or authentication something, but the results were really surprising. Here's some surprising truths that he has to share with us based on his lived experience. So please take it away, Rahul.
Thanks so much, Rashmi. Hi, I'm Rahul, co-founder and COO of Medplum. And I personally, and with our FDE team, have worked on countless Medplum deployments. And without spoiling the surprise, the main secret I've learned to making your implementation successful is to actually get your clinical workflow built on the right foundation. It's less about tools and more about operations. So today I'm going to actually talk a little bit about the intersection of operations and app development. As healthcare devs, in addition to your traditional BD and product stakeholders, you also have this new stakeholders, your clinical team. One of the main apps that we build are to help those clinicians and caregivers do their jobs more effectively. The most successful teams we've worked with understand this really deeply, and they become a powerful force multiplier for their medical counterparts. And it's all about optimizing their workflows. I've had the deep privilege of working with some really great teams and learning best practices as they scale from 0 to 1 and from 1 to N. So today I'll talk about 3 design patterns we've been able to glean working with these teams and teach you how you can be the ultimate partner for your healthcare organization. So without further ado, the first design pattern I'm going to talk about is the usage of explicit tasks versus implicit knowledge. And I'll start with an example from a startup customers of ours. They were working on tracking their patients through their journey, and they began with a very simple spreadsheet. Started out pretty easy, just a few columns, but as they scaled up, the complexity grew and their spreadsheet got wider. Different insurance providers started to require custom verification steps. New patient populations needed triage steps to handle routing. They started to have to add columns for error handling, like patient forgot to schedule or someone didn't pick up their medications. And eventually, not all the steps even applied to everyone. So they started experimenting with Excel formulas and conditional formatting to make this a usable tool. But the cognitive burden just continued to grow and grow. Eventually, they recognized this was more of an app than a spreadsheet, and they brought developers in to make this a real clinical application. But the surprising thing was that their clinicians were still spending about the same amount of time with all this tracking and bookkeeping. And the root of the problem was not a spreadsheet versus app problem. It was that the work to be done was implicit. It lived inside people's heads. For an example, when a patient signed up, a clinician had to look at them and say, are they self-pay versus insurance pay? Oh, if they're insurance, I need to take certain steps to do. And people need to be trained on this workflow and the system and hold a lot of cognitive load. So for this customer, we actually migrated them to a system where at each stage, the work to be done, instead of living in people's heads, were stored explicitly in the system as fire task resources. The clinician saw immediate gains as he could walk up, look at a patient chart, and understand the outstanding work without holding a lot of state in their memory. The developers actually were able to clean up a lot of their code as well. Without explicit tasks, a lot of these business rules got encoded as a maze of if-then logic that sat either on the server or on their front end or in some ungodly mix of the two. But by moving to a more declarative model using tasks, they were able to write smaller, more modular code that was just responsible for producing and consuming tasks. It was very similar to implementing like a job queue in a distributed system. You go from a tangle of many connections between services to an orderly stream of work to be done, where all the modules just talk to the queue, either reading or writing. This has extra benefits in healthcare because there's so many different exceptions on things that can happen when dealing with the real world. And the operations teams loved it because they had so much better visibility on all the work that was in process. So after moving to this explicit task-based formula, the next design pattern I want to talk about is focusing on top of license care. So I want to then shift gears, talk about a different customer of ours that was a bit farther along in their journey, and they did have an explicit notion of tasks, but they were still implementing them as a checklist of to-dos per patient. A physician would look through each patient they had assigned to them, but they would spend a significant amount of time on non-medical tasks, verifying driver's licenses, checking insurance, sending email reminders, and follow-ups. Working with this customer, we were able to transition them from dividing the work vertically, i.e. per patient, to horizontally, i.e. by task type. They could annotate each task by the role that could perform it, and they were able to build pools or queues of all these different pieces of work to be handled by different types of staff. And the end result was that all the ID checks, insurance work, and billing were all handled by non-clinical staff, and the doctors and nurses were able to focus their time on patient interaction and care planning. The development teams were able to grow fast, really prioritize this model, which is called top of license care. They delegate everything that they can to non-clinical staff and automation to free up the clinical forward flow. There's a little bit of work that goes into this to annotate which roles and task types are matched together, but the end result is a much higher throughput system. Continuing the job queue analogy, it's something similar to rolling out Kubernetes for your clinical workforce. You have different types of nodes, GPU, CPU, IO bound, and different types of workloads, and you're able to scale each type of capacity horizontally depending on the type of work you have. Not only does it make your clinical users happy, but it also makes it clear where the opportunity is to implement automation and AI. You just progressively move tasks down the pyramid from clinical to non-clinical to the automation layer. Ultimately, as a developer, this frees you up to do more interesting things yourself. The last design pattern I'll talk about, once you've accomplished these first two, is to move to an event-driven architecture. Continuing on with the same customer from the previous example, even after they built out task pools segmented by roles, they were still spending a lot of work manually creating those tasks. Doctors would open up a patient chart and check across internal notes, messages in their inbox, calendars, and manually file tasks in the system. They weren't doing all the tasks themselves at this point, so they still had a win, but they were maintaining the cognitive load of creating and coordinating these tasks. And sometimes they would still miss things. A patient maybe sent a message when they were very busy, doctor didn't see it, and it would take days for them to respond if they remembered it at all. The solution here was to combine the task model with event-based tools that we provide in Medplum. They would use subscriptions to look for automatic changes to the data state, Medplum bots to ingest data from third-party systems, and the Medplum agent to receive HL7 feeds with data from legacy applications and devices. As soon as something like a lab report came in from an external system, it immediately created a task for an MD. They didn't have to remember to file the task manually. They could even set up tasks as reminders for bots running on cron jobs. For example, to send a daily reminder to all patients 1 or 3 days ahead of their appointment. And this is where the system starts to feel magical. By combining this event-driven flow with some of the AI and automation tools that everyone's experimenting with, it stops feeling like a traditional EHR, really like an adaptive and reactive care platform. Rather than just optimizing clicks and data entry, the system knows when a patient needs something, what the next follow-up action is, and who the right person is to perform that action. We've even seen some people experimenting with wackier concepts like connecting to patient calendars and detecting when they have travel booked, rerouting their prescriptions or refills based on that vacation. Once you have this event-driven jobs framework, you have built the Iron Man suit for your clinical staff. It allows them to deliver the same quality and intimate patient care across thousands, hundreds of thousands, and even millions of patients a month. Just like strong developer teams master data structures, this is the clinical operations data structure. Tasks and workflow may not be the sexiest part of health tech, but they're actually one of the biggest unlocks we've seen for our development teams. Once they get this machine going, they stop focusing on firefighting and edge case exception handling, and they get to start focusing on targeted, high impact features that really move the needle on patient care. And this entire experience is buildable today. So we have folks in our community building various parts of it. So I encourage you to reach out on Discord, to us and maybe even share your own knowledge of how your workflow connects to this future. I hope you enjoyed this talk, and thank you very much for listening.